You know, we all know about Jesus and the cross, right? That he was an acceptable sacrifice to God. But you know, that goes two ways. God made a sacrifice for us. Amen. And we tend to forget about that. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. An acceptable sacrifice. Not all sacrifices are acceptable. Quite often we make sacrifices that would please us, and we think that they would please God. But that's what Cain did, right? Cain figured that what pleased Cain would please God, and found out that that just wasn't true. It was Abel who gave what God wanted, not out of himself, but out of what God gave him. Because Abel means I'm a vapor, I'm nothing. That's what that word Abel means, right? Cain was full of himself. Abel was emptied of self. That's why Cain couldn't be Abel. Cain wasn't Abel, that's right. Leviticus 22, 17 to 20, we see something about sacrifice here. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, whatever man of the house of Israel or of the strangers in Israel who offers his sacrifice for any of his vows or for any of his free will offerings, which they offer to the Lord as a burnt offering, you shall offer of your own free will a male without blemish from the cattle, from the sheep, or from the goats. Whatever has a defect, you shall not offer, for it shall not be acceptable on your behalf. This is a shadow of the offering that God would make of himself for us, that he was without spot and blemish. He was perfect, the only perfect man, because as Jim stood up here and said this morning, perfection is an absolute. Perfection means nothing imperfect, right? Who can fulfill that? Only Christ fulfilled that. Nobody else could. And who is Christ? He is God made flesh. That's what he is. God poured himself into a human body so that we'd be able to know him as we know each other. What a groove, huh? When I was in high school, that was a long time ago. I barely remember it. But I used to go down to a local newsstand, and I'd see there's a book there that was full of cartoons, and it was called Egbert. Have any of you ever seen Egbert? A few of you are ancient enough, right? I used to like Egbert. Egbert was a fetus, and he was in his mother's womb with his sister. Don't remember. I don't think the sister had a name. But anyway, Egbert was a fetus, and this book was a collection of thoughts and witty sayings from fetus in the womb of his mother. And I forgot about fetus until a few years ago when I heard a modern parable on the Christian radio about two fetuses discussing their view of life from the womb. The boy, it's always the boy, he confidently proclaimed that he had explored the entirety of their world and that nothing extended beyond its borders. It's a limited view, isn't it? It's amazing how many of us have that limited view. If I can't see it, it doesn't exist. But the girl, it's always the girl, said that she was sure that there was more to their world than what was apparent to them. She said that on occasion she had heard sounds that seemed to come from somewhere outside of their world. And she thought that she had even heard a voice talking to her directly. She told her brother that she had received a vision and that she was sure that one day they would leave their world and find themselves in a bright place where they would be able to look upon the face of the one who had cared for them from their very beginning. How about that? Have you ever thought that this world is very much like a womb? And we are not much different from the boy who thought that there was nothing beyond its borders. Many parallels can be drawn from the natural in order to understand the spiritual. These are called shadows of a reality that's extended beyond what we can see, and taste, touch, and feel. There are many things that are common to all forms of life in this world, for example. And there are those who think that these similarities speak of a common ancestor. You know, we all came from monkeys. Where'd the monkeys come from? The monkeys came from rocks. Wait a minute, no. They came from one-celled organisms. Where did the one-celled organisms come from? Oh, they came from rocks. Oh. But you know what? I believe that everything in this world, all the links of everything join together to point out not to a common ancestor, but a common creator. Amen? God assures us that he has placed within each person a knowledge of his holy existence and a hunger for his holy presence. Just as surely as a mother's voice can penetrate the walls of her womb and speak words of love and encouragement to her baby, so the voice of the God who created us penetrates the confines of our natural world and our natural senses and speaks to the spirit of all who will listen. So many of us shut it out, you know? What's that I hear? Nothing. I'd much rather hear what I want to hear and disregard the rest, right? Well, Romans 1:18-20 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth," who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. That's not agreeing with God. That's what unrighteousness is. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. Verse 20 says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." You know, the atheist come to me and say these atheists, I'll just say, you're not. You only think you are. Because deep, deep down inside of you, you know darn well there's a God. You know why? Because he put a knowledge of himself in you before you were born. And you have chosen to disregard it. You have suppressed the truth and unrighteousness. And you know that carries a consequence. You know, we are free to deny it, but the scriptures tell us that we do so without excuse, and we do so at our own peril. God wants us to draw near to him, not because he needs us, but because he loves us and desires to surround us with a peace that surpasses all understanding. You know, it's so unfortunate. There's been so much contradiction about who God is that's come from so many churches. You know, sin consciousness, so much sin consciousness. You know what? We're not supposed to be sin conscious, folks. We're supposed to be Christ conscious. Stop thinking about your sins and start thinking about him, and guess what will happen to your sins? They'll disappear. They will disappear. Sin consciousness keeps you tied to sin. It keeps you tied to ungodliness. And it keeps you away from him. Fire and brimstone. That's not what it's all about. It's about love. It's about love. It's about God taking on humanity to become one of us, that he might be able to show us the way. And also, because God is a just God, he had to fulfill righteousness. He had to fulfill justice. And so he who could pay the penalty for us had to come, right? Can't pay it yourself. A perfect God requires perfect payment, right? You have perfect payment to give? Neither do I. So he gave it to himself. I think that's wonderful. Wonderful. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. God loves us so much that he made the first move toward relationship with us. The Bible tells us that Adam knew him from the moment of his creation, right? Eden was Adam's home until he chose to live outside the protected area. What's Eden? Eden means pleasure. That's what the word Eden means, pleasure. And it was a protected area of pleasure. It was a garden. Garden is gan in the Hebrew. It means a protected, separate area. So you have this protected area of pleasure. Why is it pleasure? Because God is there, right? You move outside of that protected area and you're in chaos, folks, right? Now the interesting thing is that Adam left and man was outside that garden for the next 4,000 years. And then Jesus came along. And from that point on, we had the opportunity to go back into the garden. All you had to do was eat from the right tree. Huh? And you think that the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, just back there 6,000 years ago? You think wrong. They're with you today. You can choose to eat from either one of those. And so many are continuing to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they can determine for themselves what is right and what is wrong, instead of listening to the one who created them. He is the one who knows what is right and what is wrong. Right? What was it that made it pleasure? The presence of God. And while Adam walked with God, he had everything that he needed, and he experienced joy unspeakable. But then he chose to listen to the serpent. You know, that inner voice that we're born with. I am the center of the universe. I want. It's all about me. And I deserve to have, I think about these ads, for these lawyers. They come on and say, you can have everything that you deserve. Yeah? How about you can have what you're entitled to? There's a little difference there, isn't there? But the old man wants everything I deserve. I deserve everything, of course, because I am me, and I am more important than anything else. Well, the serpent takes advantage of that. He did in the Garden of Eden, and he does today. He takes advantage of your ego, of thinking that you are the center of the universe. But the truth is that we are not the center of the universe, but that we have access to God Almighty. That's really important. But we have to do it his way. You know that? You can't do it your own way. So he listened to the serpent, and like the prodigal son, he went his own way into a world without God, into a world of chaos and death. Right? Outside that garden of pleasure is nothing but chaos and death, disorder. In God's presence is order. Outside of God's presence is chaos, disorder. Am I right? Then after many centuries of silence, Adam came along. Abraham. Abraham. At that point, he's Abram. And he heard the voice of God. And in obedience, he crossed over the gap that separated sinful man from a holy God. We'll look at Genesis 12, verses 1 to 6. See, he became the first Hebrew. It says, now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your own country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The Lord said, Abram, get out of this country. You know where Abram was born? He was born in Ur of the Chaldees. In other words, in Babylon. He was a Babylonian. Interesting. Babylonian. Babel. Kind of talking about confusion here, right? We were all born into confusion, folks. We have to be reborn into life, right? Anyway, here he is. He's told, God says, get out of your country and leave your family. What's he telling you? He's calling for separation, folks, right? We are in the world, but not of the world. He's calling for separation. He says, go to another place. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed and go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to a place called Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. So he went from Ur of the Chaldees, and Ur actually means to be enlightened, means light, means to, like the penny drops. See, that's what happens when you start to realize that you need to be changed. The penny drops. You get enlightened. Now you know that there's a move that has to be made. So then he went to Haran, and Haran actually is a word that means a furnace. You have to be refined, and ore must be heated to be refined. So he's in this furnace. From this furnace, he moves to his final destination. He moves to Canaan. And Canaan is a word that means humility. So he starts in Ur of the Chaldees, which means he starts in confusion. He moves through refinement in a furnace, and then he ends up in humility. Now, God gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud, right? Every one of those patriarchs were buried in humility. They were buried in Canaan. That's what happens to us. In then came obedience, the same obedience that found him on Moriah, about to offer his only son as a sacrifice, then when a substitute was graciously provided by, and Isaac lived. In the I think it's in the Talmud, the commentary of the Jews, I think they say that God offered himself as a sacrifice. Here's what happened. Genesis 22, verse 5. Abraham said to his young son, stay here with the donkey, and the lad and I will go up yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. I think this is pretty interesting, because Abraham said, wait here, and I'll come back to you. Wait here. So he knew that Isaac wasn't going to be sacrificed. He must have. Otherwise, why would he tell the fellows with him, wait here, and we'll come back? Then in Genesis 22:13-14, then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. See, Abraham is about to sacrifice his only son. Abraham is a picture of God the Father, and Isaac is a picture of God the Son. And Abram is about to sacrifice Isaac, but then he sees a ram caught in a thicket by its thorns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Jireh. And Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. But what did he provide? He provided for himself a sacrifice. A ram in the thicket, which is a picture of Jesus, right? Jesus is the Lamb of God. He is also a ram because the ram is the strong one. So this began the covenant of blood that foretold of the depth of God's desire for intimacy with his people. God really wants intimacy with us. See, so often we've been taught that we're simply supposed to keep God at a distance. But God doesn't want us at a distance. He wants a relationship with us, right? Many more centuries passed, and the next person to hear God was Moses. God instructed Moses in Exodus 12, verse 22, to take a lamb without spot or blemish, kill it, and place its blood on the doorposts of each house wherein were his people. And this was the beginning of the Levitical ordinances that left the ceremonial trail of blood from the time of Moses until the consummation of the covenant that they represented at a place called Calvary. It's been said that religion is man's attempt to reach God, right? And that's true. Religion is man's attempt to reach God. And the Levitical services were certainly that very thing. But they were more than that. The blood represented the conscious life. The conscious life. You know, Cain offered a cabbage to God. Really, that's what he did. He offered vegetation, right? Where's the blood? The blood is in the life. The life is in the consciousness. And that's what God wants, is our consciousness. You know, Jim mentioned up here, he ended his message with two verses which are pivotal, right? You all know them, right? Romans 12, 1 and 2. That we are to offer ourselves a living sacrifice. The life is in the blood. That's the blood you offer. It's not that you cut your veins open. It's that you offer your life to him. The life is in the blood, right? And then what? Then to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, by the intake of Bible doctrine, by being, as Jim mentioned this morning, looking into the scriptures as a mirror and not seeing yourself, but seeing the one that they talk about, seeing Jesus until you become like him, until you look in the scriptures and you see a reflection of yourself. But that's only going to take place if you look in them often. Am I right? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might become a reflection of him, that you might become a manifestation of the Lord Jesus Christ. Only an unblemished life was acceptable to God. My life is not acceptable to him. Neither is yours. but I can have the life of Christ in me, and you can have the life of Christ in you. All you have to do is, like I say, look into the mirror of the reflections of the Word of God until you see a reflection of Christ in yourself. Amen? It's only an unblemished life that was acceptable to a holy God. This foretold the perfect one, which was to come and offer his own blood, his own life, not a cabbage, as an acceptable sacrifice to God. This is certainly not new information to most Christians. But have you ever thought that when God demanded that the best be given to him, it was a shadow of God giving his best to us? Think about that. What I mean is this. Through Moses, that is through the law, because Moses represents the law, man reaches out to a holy God. But through Jesus, who was the fulfillment of the law, God reaches out to man. It says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." The best was to be given to God as a shadow of God giving his best to us. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? We spend so much time thinking of how we might please God, of what might be acceptable to him, but do we stop to consider how acceptable the sacrifice of God's perfect Lamb should be to us? When I consider the enormity of it, I can hardly contain myself. It gives new meaning to John 3:16, which says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." God so loved the world that he would give himself as a sacrifice, an acceptable sacrifice for us, for our salvation. As in the parable of the babies in their mother's womb, we in the womb of the earth have been visited by the voice of our Creator, speaking words of love and encouragement to us. God has not stood off at a distance and demanded that we struggle to rise to his level. Rather, he has made a bridge with his own body that we all who accept his gracious invitation can cross over to his waiting embrace. The great God of the universe, the creator of all that exists, humbled himself to come to us that we might know him intimately. This is a type of relationship that God desires so deeply. A relationship that speaks of knowledge, of caring, and of selfless love. And like the blessing that it is, it must flow both ways. As the psalm says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and let everything within me bless his holy name." Bless him. The scriptures assure us from Genesis to Revelation that God provided for himself a perfect and acceptable sacrifice. He provided himself as a perfect and acceptable sacrifice. And if you have the eyes to see it, in that same sacrifice, he also provided a perfect sacrifice that should be accepted to every member of the human race. We should all accept that sacrifice. Who would reject such an astonishing expression of perfect love? Do you find God's holy sacrifice to be acceptable and pleasing? I know I do. Call out to him in the privacy of your own thoughts and tell him that you accept him with all of your heart. We can each do that. You can do that right now. Thank him for his indescribable gift and for the magnificence of his holy character, a character that he makes available to us. He gives us great and precious promises. They're not there to have the things that we want. Those great and precious promises, he tells us exactly why he gives them to us. It's so that we might become partakers of his very nature, of the divine nature. That he would share himself with us to that degree, just astounding. That is astounding. We're not deserving of any of it. But it's made available to us. See, that's what love is. Love is not giving something that you might get something in return. Love is giving something because you can't help it, because it's part of who you are. That's what God is. He is love. That's why we must focus on Jesus, not on sin. Yeah, you're gonna fall down every once in a while. But if you continue focus on what you tripped over, you're not going to make any headway. Amen. Reach out and take the hand of the one that's extended towards you to pull you up out of that rut. Realize that he loves you with an everlasting love. He is not one to forsake you. Praise his holy name. Thank him for his indescribable gift and for the magnificence of his holy character. That he would love us so much that he would give his very best for us. He would give himself for us, even while we were sinners. Even while we were against him, he did it. Even when there was nothing in us to make us attractive to a holy God, Christ died to bring us to himself. Romans 5:8. God demonstrated his own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ's death is still the only way to receive forgiveness. The only way. In Romans 11:33-36, I finish with this. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. And now we have the opportunity to offer ourselves to him. We're going to sing a song. I surrender all. Do you surrender all? Surrender all to him.
Surrender all to him. I freely
confidence in you, Lord Jesus. We follow you.